There's a vast amount of racism in American film, but this might be one of the most racist films we've done.
No, the religion is actually just manipulating people and leading people into unjust wars for no good reason other than keep the rich rich. Whoa, man, mind blown.
But you're not thinking like a capitalist there.
I'm not. That's always been my problem.
It's a nice liberal nationalist movie where the president can go blow up aliens with a jet fighter, and yet you're still not actually being xenophobic. It's kind of amazing.
The whole QAnon universe, I was like, this seems ripe for them to grab onto one of these two movies and totally miss the point.
Yes.
And they have.
You know, the best they really have is like gentrification and real estate speculation in hospitals.
Yeah, that's that's Cleveland in a nutshell right there.
Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff. It is a movie that should be watched by organizers and radicals and leftists and anybody who wants to make a better world. This movie, on the other hand, means none of those things.
It's a Franken blockbuster, like you said, and it's put together in sequences that play out like movie trailers.
Really regressive gender politics, like incredible, but to the point of near parody.
No, Norm, George Wendt in this movie definitely would have been wearing a MAGA hat if this movie was made nowadays.
Oh, God, right? And then convince the workers to break their own picket.
Yeah.
Fuck this movie. It's,
Damn, I wish this movie was better, because that's a kick-ass ending.
This is a paint-by-numbers propaganda movie that completely works because the characters are compelling and real.
Welcome all to The Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe that films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And mine is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we're looking at writer, director, actors Cheryl Dunye's Watermelon Woman from 1996.
Which will be now, Isaac, our third kind of auteur series. We've sort of inadvertently been charting our way through, very strong filmmaker voices, a lot of times writer and directors, I think in all the cases we've been looking at so far. Now we also have actor in the mix too. So Cheryl wrote, directed, acted, and on a low budget movie like this, I'm assuming probably did a lot more other things too, was, instrumental in editing, probably some picking locations, all the stuff you do when you're making a super low budget independent film.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is like a no budget movie. Well, and I mean, this started with us doing a couple of, Black auteurs and just sort of thinking we just keep going for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, well, not once again, but would like to apologize for the huge gap between episodes. I just need to start planning out finals week. I'm on a quarter system here. Finals weeks are just going to be like that.
Well, if we had our shit together, I think we probably could have announced there was going to be a break. It looks like we were on vacation for a month, but in fact, we were running around in like 20 different directions if you put both of our schedules together. And because I've been working for the local film festival and their podcast series too. So it's you got busy for a couple weeks, and then it went into you had a little bit of a break, and then I was really busy for a couple weeks, and now we are finally back in front of microphones.
Yeah, we're actually in this.
Yeah.
For a movie that I've wanted to sort of look at for a while, or to at least get your take on.
And I felt shamed for that entire time because this is a time period of film when I was actively going to the movie theaters, specifically the art house theater. I was going to the Campus Film Society screenings because I was a film history major at the time. This movie deals directly with film history, and it's part of the new queer movement, which the new queer cinema movement that popped up in the United States, which I was watching actively at art houses, and I was actively programming for the Film Society I was part of on campus, and had never watched this film until a couple weeks ago.
But you did it.
I did, but it's definitely the most shame I've felt in a long, long time of finally filling in a gap in my film watching. And I was like, why have I never attended a screening or pushed play on this movie? It's been streaming for years. Just all I had to do was push a button.
I don't know. What's your excuse? I mean, when I think of you, I think 90s guy.
Yeah. Wait, 90s film?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it's one of the eras. I mean, it's not one of the eras I've researched as far as film history goes, but like I lived it. So yeah, I feel like there's some good context there. But well, anyway, yeah, it's been watched, it's been appreciated, and I'm in love, as I was, expecting to be after watching this one.
Mhm.
We did mention. I looked up a little bit of financing actually on this film since we were mentioning the budget, and Cheryl did get a grant. Cheryl, I say Cheryl like I know her. The film is so intimate. I feel like you do get to know her, even though it's
Right.
kind of a fictional version of her. She did have an endowment, a grant actually for like 30 grand from the National Endowment for the Arts. So good on some arts funding there. But she did a lot of donations from friends, did some fundraising on herself to get up to $300,000, which to me, I mean, that's a good chunk of change, obviously. But we're also talking about production in like 93, I would say probably 93, 94, maybe into 95. It comes out in 96. This is not a shoot on your phone era. This is not a shoot digital era. She's shooting this film on film and some video because there's a great aesthetic here we'll get into in a minute. But $300,000 is not that much money at all when you're talking about film and then developing costs and then editing costs when you're doing it, on physical film of the time period.
Yeah. No, this is a micro budget film
Yes,
for
yeah,
the
for
time
sure.
period. What do you know if there was any controversies around this one?
What do you mean?
Oh, I mean, just because it gets federal funding and it's about Black queer people.
Oh, yes, yeah, of course, because there's a bunch of closed-minded racist morons that represent people in the seats of power. So yeah,
Yeah.
there were actually. I have a quote. Sorry, I'm pausing here. I copy and pasted it into the wrong doc. Representative Peter Hoekstra, who was chairman of the House Education and Workforce Committee at the time,
Mm.
he wrote a letter to the NEA chairwoman at the time, Jane Alexander, stating that The Watermelon Woman, quote, is one of several gay and lesbian themed works cited by the committee as evidence of the serious possibility that taxpayer money is being used to fund the production and distribution of patently offensive and possibly pornographic movies.
Oh no, there's a sex scene in the film.
Did you did the word pornography ever enter your mind when you were watching this film, Isaac?
Nope. Nope. No, it didn't. But I mean, obviously, there is an actual sex scene. There is
Yeah.
even the slightest bit of nudity. Oh my! And that'll, yeah. I mean, this is the '90s culture wars around public funding for stuff is like
Yes.
very much a thing. And so I s- I was this was bait because I seem to remember something about
Yeah.
this particular movie getting a reaction.
It did. It did. Which I mean, it's patently absurd. $30,000 of federal funding went to this micro budget film. I mean, do we need to talk about the military activities of the 90s the federal government was funding? Like, come on, 30 grand.
Right.
I'm sure that congressperson spent that on flights to and from or dinners in their career. Like, fuck off. That's ridiculous.
Well, but it's not about money ultimately. I mean,
No,
what
it's
it is
sure, like you said. Yeah.
yeah, it's about what a movie like this represents. A movie that is representing and bringing out a perspective that doesn't get into film and doesn't get into popular culture and is corrosive to a particular vision of both racial and gendered like power in society.
But you know what? Honestly, it kind of warms my heart that somebody out there was thinking that the Watermelon Woman was a threat to like white, hetero, cis Christian culture. Like, good. I'm glad it bugged you, Representative.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean you hope something it's both sad when a movie it's so interesting because the tone is so light, right? In so
Yeah,
many ways.
yeah.
And yet they pack in so many she packs in so many layers of like but basically we go from sort of like so many layers of different kinds of sort of racism
Mm-hmm.
and different kinds of I mean more sort of I mean it's less queer phobic stuff and more like just sort of layers of the different sort of ways that sort of racism shapes the environment. Well, and the combination of queer phobia because we can get to this. We're not really doing a scene by scene here, but like you deal with the trust fund white girlfriend who's actually like fetishizing Black people in weird ways.
Mm-hmm.
You deal with the history of Hollywood and basically the erasure of queer life and Black queer life, but then also
And also in there too, women's roles. throughout.
And women's, so specifically the way Black women's roles and you know, all the, you know, the sort of the classic Hollywood sort of mammy thing, like basically the structures of white supremacy
Yeah.
so deep within film. And you even have, I mean, there is a scene, and I think this is probably, for me, the tensest scene of the movie, and the one where like things sort of like hit a less sort of like melodramatic, sort of like interpersonal note, is because she's, you know, she's not particularly femme, and so she has an altercation with the police where they think that she's a man.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you know, like with all of the sort of racial assumptions that come with that. So like a particular type of queer experience with the police,
Right.
Black queer experience with the police,
Right.
that wouldn't really happen otherwise. If she was femme, if she wasn't Black, this wouldn't be happening.
Right.
So like I mean, for for a short movie that actually has a relatively light tone, that's a lot.
And I think, I mean, it's the entire premise of this show we've been doing. But when you said layers in the movie, your mind went in the directions you just were talking about. My brain went into the layers of film and narrative that Cheryl's put together to tell this story in a completely cinematic way, not even a political way that you were just describing. Which is why we shuffle our brains together and try to bring an interesting perspective to any movies we're talking about. But at the same time, we should probably explain the movie we're talking about as we dive in here, Isaac, for folks that have not seen The Watermelon Woman. Cheryl Dunye, the writer, director, actor extraordinaire behind this film, also plays a character named Cheryl. So kind of an approximation, we're assuming, of her when she was in her 20s. Who's a filmmaker. So she's a 20-something at the time in the movie. She's a 20-something video store employee with dreams to open her own production company with her friend and coworker, Tamara. She ends up becoming obsessed with this Black actress, as you mentioned, Isaac, who keeps popping up in these 1930s American films. Some of them are race films, which we've actually already talked about on a couple previous episodes here. And this actress she discovers in these 30s films is known only as the Watermelon Woman, which is where we get the title of the film. And Cheryl then decides to set out. She feels that spark. She feels that spark of creativity, but also research. She sets out to create a documentary, which will be her first film, that hopefully will lead her to identify this Watermelon Woman who she's investigating by going and meeting with film historians and archivists and academics. And she feels like, as she investigates, she feels this, not really unexpected. I think we would expect it as far as plots go. She feels a kinship with this woman. It ends up turning out to be Faye Richards / Faith Richardson, depending on how the research goes. And along the way, Cheryl, in real life, as a 20-something video store employee, documentary filmmaker, she starts a relationship and ends up kind of interestingly mirroring what, as she finds out more about the Watermelon Woman, it becomes sort of Cheryl's story as well.
Hi, I'm Cheryl, and I'm a filmmaker. Nah, I'm not really a filmmaker, but I have a videotaping business with my friend Tamara, and I work at a video store, so I'm working on being a filmmaker. The problem is I don't know what I want to make a film on. I know it has to be about Black women because our stories have never been told. So I've been renting movies. No, I haven't been renting movies, but I get movies from the video store that I work at, and I've taken all these films out from the 30s and 40s with Black actresses in them, like Hattie McDaniel and Louise Beavers. And in these films, in some of the films, the Black actresses aren't even listed in the credits, and I was just totally shocked by that. So in this one film that came into the store, Plantation Memories, I saw the most beautiful Black mammy named Elsie. Her name, the Watermelon Woman. That's right, Watermelon Woman. Is Watermelon Woman her first name, her last name, or is it her whole name? I don't know, but girlfriend has it going on, and I think I've figured out what my project's gonna be on. I'm gonna make a movie about her. I'm gonna find out what her real name is, who she was and is, everything I can find out about her. Because something in her face, something in the way she looks and moves is serious, is interesting. And I'm gonna just tell you all about it.
Which I guess we should say then too, the Watermelon Woman, Faye, she had so there's a Black female actress who's playing the Watermelon Woman in these scenes. in these movies, she has a relationship with her white female director through some of these movies as well, which Cheryl discovers in the process of making the documentary and doing research. At the same time, Cheryl is dating the white trust fund lesbian, as you referenced earlier, Isaac, who's very, I put in my notes, very politically tone deaf, to the point of like being, I was thinking offensive, but you kept using the word cringe while watching this movie, Isaac.
Well, I mean, they are. I mean, part of it is that this is in part sort of like, I don't know if melodrama is the right term, but like, like there's a soap opera epic element to this, right? Where, she's sort of, in a certain sense, doing this project is making it harder for her to relate to people. So like her other sort of black lesbian friend, who's mainly just interested in her girlfriend and like, day-to-day stuff, right? They're having trouble relating.
Tamara, who she works with.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there's cringy stuff there where he's, well, there's a scene with some pretty bad karaoke, and you're like, I know this is supposed to make us feel this.
Oh, yeah, that's standard cringe, I think.
That's standard cringe. But then, yeah, I mean, part of it is that, so she's having difficulty with her friend as she's trying to sort of unearth and understand herself through sort of black lesbian history and film, basically, right? Like, I mean, here's she's this budding filmmaker. She has this sort of moment where it's like, am I a filmmaker? I'm not really a filmmaker. And it's like, no, I'm a filmmaker. Like describing herself as filmmaker.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Because so, yeah, we should say too, the aesthetic before we kind of get into the individual scenes. The aesthetic is there's, basically we're talking about the mid 90s here. So you have this like kind of slacker, the movie Clerks. You're working in a video store. You're working in like these kind of part-time minimum wage kind of gig spaces, but she's around all this film history in the video store. And then she's doing a video documentary. So there's scenes where Cheryl is talking to the camera, to a video camera, about documenting her exploration of digging into the life of the watermelon woman. And then she takes the video camera to a few different towns, different environments, to film talking head documentary testimonials with academics and film historians to uncover more about the watermelon woman. Sorry, there's like that's what I was saying with the format and the layers that you were saying earlier. There's like, which scene are we talking about? Are we talking about the real life scene of her or the documentary side of it? I just meant just so we're differentiating as you were talking about the cringe here. The cringe is coming from Cheryl's real life. It's not as of yet coming from the documentary part that she's making.
It's not coming from the documentary. I think when I meant cringe is so she's having these sorts of, this film is in a sense about like, that she's making is about sort of discovering something that she relates to within film and sort of and exploring, the history that is sort of the context for herself in a sense, right?
Right.
But at the other layer of cringe is basically every white person in this movie, who are all at one level or another, either fetishizing or uncomfortable with the nature of struggle. So either there's her new white girlfriend who sort of turns out to be like a rich trust fund kid who fetishizes black people.
Yeah. Diana, played by Guinevere Turner. More on her in just a moment.
Or the academic, who we will also talk more about, who is just uncomfortable with just dealing with the racist history of American films. So she just wants to compare them to her Italian family or whatever. This is not what this is about. It's all the there's a lot of stuff where it's just like, oh boy, this is bad, but this captures it pretty well, right? Like I think part of it is this is what I was saying before, is that like each one of these interactions like kind of perfectly encapsulates different layers of sort of like structural racism, but oh man, are they awkward scenes.
Yeah, and I guess we should probably say too up front, when we're saying cringe, it's not like this movie didn't age well. Oh God, people were doing that in the night. That was what the culture was in the 90s. It's not cringe that way. It's like cringe satire, because it's cutting so close to the bone and so accurately capturing what it's setting out to capture that it makes you cringe.
Yeah, they're like they're really well set up scenes.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's very well done.
The dialogue is like perfectly on point, and you're like, oh my God. Ugh.
So that's what I was thinking when when you're talking about layers and the cringe from the film narrative perspective. If you know a little bit about, if you have some context going into this film, there's the cringe element to it. But to me, like, and I got the cringe you were talking about, but it slipped very quickly then from the cringe into, I thought, insightful and hilarious satire. And I think the
Right.
best example of that is because you've got Cheryl's girlfriend, Cheryl's white trust fund girlfriend, Diana, is played by Guinevere Turner, who I remember one of the ones I was going to see in the theater back in the day was Go Fish,
Mm.
breakthrough for new queer cinema, but also for lesbian representation on film. It's Rose Trost co-wrote it with Guinevere Turner and then directed it. Guinevere Turner co-wrote and then starred in it, and it's just an out and out hilarious. I mean, say romantic comedy, but I would say the emphasis in this one is on the comedy aspect. So I'm aware of, if you're aware of Guinevere Turner's role in the new queer movement and in film history, which is, you know, of the time period there, she's playing this part. Like, for me, then, knowing that going in to watch this movie, I'm realizing she's playing this part with kind of a wink wink nudge nudge of like, I know this person exists and now I'm going to play this part, and yeah, it's pretty cringy. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. No. There's an intentional. Well, I mean, I think there. I wonder. So this is what I would wonder, and I don't know the answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
But with this, and also, can we just point out that there's another person playing a role like this, right? So the academic that she talks to about,
Oh, Camille Paglia, I think that's how you pronounce her last name.
right? So
Yeah.
like, she's also like, I think you're pointing out is like she's actually literally playing the opposite of what she actually does.
Oh yeah, like she's
Sort
a
of,
feminist academic, social critic. Yeah, like I've read her work before, and then it's like, oh my god, I think I know who that is. So like, if you know who that is, and then she plays the academic, which I think you're going to speak to here, like it's
yeah.
the opposite of her. So that added a layer to me that was funny.
But I think it's funny, but I think part of what they're doing is this is a critique of the scene, right?
Yes, yeah,
And so they're knowingly taking part and using the fact that they're recognizable, or the Cheryl Dunye is using the fact that they're recognizable and they're taking part in this to make a critique of the racial politics of the scene,
there you go.
of
Yes.
of the indie scene and sort of academia and how it handles this stuff. And so those are layers that I didn't pick up on because I'm not a 90s person.
Well, racial and also sexuality too. Because if I
Right.
remember correctly, Camille, who's ostensibly in the movie, she plays herself. Like she's billed by her actual name in the movie, but she's not playing who she is. Like it's, you know, like I said, kind of a parody of it. But if I remember right too, she's also uncomfortable. Is she the one who's uncomfortable when Cheryl mentions that Faye, the watermelon woman, was actually having a relationship with the white director, the white female director?
No, that the specifically the scene where that falls apart is actually with the director's sister.
Dr. Sister. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in that specifically with those two, it is sort of like, well, look at this new queer cinema. How does it handle race? That might be
Mhm.
part of what the angle is there, or at least, or maybe not that even that deep, but like definitely like you can feel that there. Yeah, there's a willingness to take that to take part in that critique,
Yeah.
um, which is a really interesting angle. So yeah, this is a movie where there's a lot more going on if you know the context of the scene at that point.
But also, we should say too, if you don't know any of that context going in, well, obviously, if you haven't seen it, you're listening to us right now, and then you go watch it, you will have that context. But you could hit play on this, and it's just a hilarious movie.
Yeah.
Like it all works. And granted, there's cringy elements, like you said, but like it's like cringe satire that really works. That will you'll have a totally enjoyable, what is like 80 minutes, 80, 90 minutes.
Well, that's just it. Like, right. Like it's really breezy. It's really, it flows nicely. You don't, like it's entertaining. You'll get engrossed in her romantic life and her friend life, sort of like
Yeah.
the soap opera element of it, and then also come to conclusions about, the need to sort of rediscover a lesbian history that's been sort of erased and disappeared. And you can see her obsessive pleasure in taking part in that, right? And in discovering that.
You know what? Okay, that actually, let's pause on that for a second because that opens up an interesting dynamic in the movie where Cheryl's now dating Diana, the white trust fund lesbian, but then she also has her best friend Tamara who works at the video store with her. And as happens, again, this speaks to the layers that Cheryl's brilliantly working with here. As anyone starts off a new relationship that's working, that clicks, and they do. Cheryl and Diana do click
Initially, yeah. Yeah,
initially,
no, it's
and that becomes all consuming because that's potentially how love grows,
right.
or the relationship deepens. So there is that, and if anybody's had like a really close friend who starts dating somebody or starts a relationship with somebody, you lose time with them as a friend, so that creates a little tension, right? And that's definitely there between Cheryl and Tamara, but also they do work together, so they do have some overlap time where they're going to be spending together. So
Right.
there's that element to it. And then as Cheryl also then another passion that is growing within the film is that Cheryl starts this documentary and gets, as you do with the project you're passionate about, you get obsessed with it. And that is a huge part of her life. So that further distances her from Tamara and just like hangout time, outside of work because she's working on this project. Whereas then also you have compounded on top of that, Diana, the new, white trust fund lesbian girlfriend, is starting to help out Cheryl with some research or ideas on the project. So now they've got even more to their relationship, that's connecting them together and spending time together. So it further pushes Tamara, out of Cheryl's circle of friend or out of her free time, other than working together a little bit. So that I think just brilliantly, like structure wise, that creates as the movie goes on more attention to that initial friendship that starts off the film.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean that's just it. Is like yeah, no, I think that's really. I mean, this is what I mean. Just a really well structured movie, right?
And that's
Like,
just one like thread of like 9 threads throughout this movie.
right. This is one thread that's like perfectly put together, and so this is like, thank you for framing it that way because that it's like why do I feel so satisfied when this movie finishes, right? Like, why do I feel this sense of like completeness? Is because there's these multiple threads that go places throughout the film, right?
Yeah.
That connect and connect and interweave and parallel in complicated ways. So, like, for instance, right? So she gets her trust fund girlfriend, and eventually realizes there's always like the racial tension underneath this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're watching the girlfriend, even their first date is like, this is somebody who feels incredibly entitled, right? Like, so Tamara and her girlfriend are reacting to this person. They're not actually wrong, right? Like,
No, no, no.
they're not wrong, but also like they need to like chill out and not be, it's like when your friend gets into a relationship with someone and you can see something like that doesn't, you don't usually convince them not to do something based on just being really going on the offense really hard.
Right.
But like, you're sort of mentioning that there's a parallel with the watermelon woman who basically in her life, wanted to be a star. There's only these particular roles for women, for black women,
Yeah.
and she ends up in a relationship with a lesbian, basically a lesbian female white director, which of course is absurdly rare in Hollywood in the 30s, right? Like, it's like there's really like only one model for who this could be. And that we don't know based on the historical stuff that she unearths, which of course, like, this is a made up figure. But she doesn't, reveal if this relationship went the same way. But underlying that relationship is is a similarity, but not an exact match with the power dynamics that she's dealing with, right?
Right.
Where you have a white person with sort of access in the world, at a broader level. But I think it actually shows the change through time. So like part of it is like basically for Faye, she would, her only means of access into Hollywood is through there. She ends up going back. Yeah, their only access through Hollywood is through relationships with white people. Basically,
Right.
there's no other way. For Cheryl in the present, she can ultimately reject that relationship. She doesn't need to do that.
The
That's
one
not
with
where
Diana.
Yeah, she doesn't need
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah.
She doesn't. She's there. There's a community and a place, and more than that. So I think there's like interesting parallels and divergences between their experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, and that in itself is really. I mean, just the way that that's set up is really interesting. I don't know. It's a really good movie.
Well, there's another aspect that I hesitate to go too far into the end of the movie because there's a reveal at the end that I really don't want to spoil for anybody who's going to want to watch it, and
Mhm.
I don't think it's entirely necessary to have a conversation about the film. Just know that like I don't want to mention that because I think it's such a like you said, it's so satisfying when it wraps up because Cheryl, as a director and as an actor and as a writer, is able to pull together all of these different threads that she's investigating. That it's such a satisfying conclusion once you see the whole picture of what Faye and then the white lesbian director Martha was the one that she was working on for all of these race films, or they weren't really race films, but they were in that kind of like basically the genre. So I don't want to ruin how they end up tracking down and what information is revealed by the fully end of the movie. But there is this other because you were talking about the kind of the professional world that Faye as a black lesbian actress in that time period, she was also around this club scene
Mm.
that Cheryl discovers as she starts to investigate. So there was like this nightclub kind of, I mean, it's 30s and 40s. So like you're talking about kind of, the jazz age, like the Harlem Renaissance kind of era.
Mhm.
So you find out that she was also around, she was also a talented singer and was around all these clubs. And I wanted to mention that because there's a segment of this production, like as Watermelon Woman as being a produced film, that Cheryl worked with an artist named Zoe Leonard to recreate fake photos from the time, like all the archival material used in the movie is created by Cheryl and this artistic team that she's working with, this artistic group that she's working with, because this isn't a real person. The Watermelon Woman isn't a real person.
Right.
But the first time watching it, I was like, you know what? If I would have watched this back in like the mid 90s when it was in art house theaters, I would have been so frustrated because I would have had to go. It's so perfectly recreated that I was like, I would have had to go. I'm like, I need to find these movies.
Mm.
I need to go figure this out. I want to see some of these movies. The one that starts it off for Cheryl in the movie is called Plantation Memories. I would have been that awkward white guy at the local library requesting somebody buy a VHS or DVD of this movie that doesn't exist. And a librarian would have been like, look, Aaron, I'm sorry. Like, I cannot find this movie. And then who knows what that would have led me to, to go into research wise. But it's so expertly created, again, on a micro budget in the
Right.
mid 90s that it's entirely convincing. So yeah, there are these club scenes. There's no, I don't remember there being any scenes of the club or her singing, but there are all these photos of her, and she goes and meets with somebody who used to work at these clubs or ran one of the clubs, and then there gets to be the race relations of like who are running these clubs. Was it allowed to be like black entrepreneurs and business owners? No,
Right.
it was a lot. It was it was white people that were owning and running these clubs, but it was like, specifically for a black audience coming into these clubs.
And you get a sense. I mean, she's the queer scene that she's describing in these clubs, because Faye, the queer scene that she's describing is like probably in a lot of ways an accurate representation of the queer scene at that time, or
It
the
seems like yeah, yeah.
lesbian scene specifically at that time.
But within
But
the already existing club scene.
right, and
Yeah,
within
really
that
interesting.
scene, but also like a fictionalized but real version
Yeah,
of that, if that makes sense.
yeah.
I mean, one of the the more powerful scenes as she gets deeper in is attempting to interview basically sort of like black lesbian elders, right? And discovering that and going deeper and deeper into that. And these are, and basically one of the basically Faye's life partner, right? Like the
Mhm.
person that she actually spent, basically the 40s onward with until she died.
That is,
Go
June is her name.
June
Yeah.
ends up in the hospital. We don't actually really, like it's like you're running out of time to rediscover this history.
Mhm.
And I think that gets it gets across. I don't want to say it adds tension. It adds pathos, poignancy to everything by the end, right? Like the sheer,
Right. Because the time period she's looking at, there is a potential like living memory of that scene of that time period, but it's got a very limited shelf life. I guess that's not the right word. It's got because it's elderly people at this point.
Yeah,
So like
these
there
are
is a limited memory if she can quickly get access to it and record it and document it. Yeah, it's almost there's like a ticking clock kind of element to it. Although it's not played like a thriller. It's just like she's already compelled to keep going down this journey, but also like there's only so much time.
right. There's only right. I mean, it underlies her sort of the obsessiveness by which she's going after these stories, which is that they're disappearing, right?
Right. That's the way to
The
see it. Yeah,
actual
exactly.
the actual living the actual people who took part of them are took part in the in this world are there, and you can talk to them, and they're disappearing.
Well, also, just as I was mentioning, like the whole idea that she was also not just an actress, but also singing in the clubs, the specific kind of like jazz nightclubs in that era. I hadn't thought of it till we was just saying that as we were recording here. But doesn't that also then mirror the karaoke scene? Is that supposed to be Cheryl's modern version of like the club scene that Faye was part of?
I don't think so.
And not that it parallels it, but like it's a version of like, oh, we went to go hear somebody sing, and like, well, Faye did it this way, and Cheryl does it this way.
I mean, well, I don't think that's, I don't know if that's quite the way, but I think what you do see, I mean, yes, things change through time. Like basically by the 90s, you could actually have like, you know, explicitly, more explicitly sort of, lesbian or queer spaces, right? That
Oh,
are,
yeah, you're right. Maybe that's it. Because, like you said, the queer space within the club scene wasn't like, oh, that's the lesbian club, or that's the like it wasn't like that in the 30s and 40s within the context of this movie or the documentary she's making. But then, yeah, by the time you get to the current era where Cheryl's at, it's a double date, and they go to a karaoke bar, and
right.
it appears like nobody gives a shit if there's what anybody's orientation is while they're here at this karaoke bar. The cringe there is that like this woman has been played up as like, oh, she's got oh, I love karaoke, I love singing, and then she starts singing and she's terrible.
Well, I think it's not that people don't give a shit about it. It's that it's specifically, it's a lesbian bar.
Okay, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. So that's what it is. I mean, it's a lesbian. No, I think part of it is, I mean, there's the scene in the archive where she actually says like, they're looking at a map and it's like, oh, it looks like there's more like basically, there's more lesbian hangouts then than there are now, and the person's like, no, those are not actually exclusively for that.
Right.
But there's actually a lot. I mean, part of the other thing, so the movie both, is very intentionally showing the progression of time and the need to recapture things in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also sort of a flatness there because, when she speaks to the white academic who's talking about her Italian family and, oh man, all right, it's just why the symbolism of racism in Hollywood, the very the key symbols like the mammy and watermelons,
Yeah.
not actually racist. Oh my gosh, but part of it is that yes, actually you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it, you're right. That person is deeply shocked to have two women together, right? Like so when
Mm-hmm.
she says that Faye and the white director are together, that just seems extremely unlikely. Like she doesn't say it didn't happen. She's just very shocked that could happen then.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing about sort of like representing this as she's speaking to the actual existence of this history, right? Speaking to the need to preserve it and to bring it out
Mm-hmm.
and argue that it exists because the assumption is always that it doesn't, right?
Right.
Even if it exists now in the present, that there isn't a history to this. And I mean, I think if anything, that's the ultimate theme of the movie is like, I mean, what is the rediscovery of this history and the centrality of it to her identity as a filmmaker, right? The need, despite the fact that this is a very fucked up history, right? It's so ingrained and integrated into sort of racism in the the history of racism or whatever. I mean, she's literally, there's a scene, it's really striking, and I actually do not feel qualified to unpack what that means, where she is repeating the lines of the watermelon woman in these race films,
Mm-hmm.
in this plantation memories, basically a movie about making white people feel okay about the Old South. And she's repeating the lines line for line. And there's a layer there that I don't feel qualified to interpret. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot going on with, how do you interact with a history that's so integrated with white supremacy at so many levels, and yet you also take yourself and your meaning and the struggle that you take your meaning and a sense of identity in history through the struggle to live through that, right?
Yeah.
And that's a particular way of dealing with that history. Not everybody does that necessarily. So I think, that's another part of sort of this the position that the movie is staking out. It is like how to interact with that history.
And I think there's an element of maybe just reciting those lines maybe gives you a feeling of connection to, like, oh, these are the same words that this other person who I'm fascinated by also said. It's like another means of connection, possibly.
I think it is a mean. Yeah, I think it is.
I mean, that's at least one layer to it. Yeah.
It's how she's empathizing. It's how she's sort of connecting. It's just such a charged imagery.
Yeah.
I almost feel like that's part of a debate that's off screen that we don't know about.
Oh, could be. Yeah. Yeah.
About how to interact with that history.
Yeah.
I mean, she's definitely taking a position on how to deal with that history, which is,
Yeah, and the right way for some person to do that would be not the right way for somebody else to do it. Yeah, so there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Again, like every single scene, like the more you dig into it, you're like, oh, that was a funny scene, or that was a good satire scene. Oh, that was a really touching scene, but then also the more you just dig into any given scene, you're like, oh, there's so much more going on here.
There's layers to everything that's going on.
Which to me, because which to me, the way we're describing that, then that sounds like one of those like, oh, I really got to do my research. Like, no, you could just hit play and totally enjoy it.
You can totally. Well, that's just it. It's like you wouldn't. Yes, that's just it. It's actually, it's a deceptively
dense film.
It's a deceptively dense. It's deceptively. I think it's rich no matter how you watch it.
Yeah,
but it's a deceptively dense film.
Yeah, it's one of the most dense pornographic films I've ever seen, according to that according to that racist congressperson. I wanted to ask you about one other cringe scene that you'd mentioned to me, and that is at one point Cheryl goes to an archivist, a clit archivist for the Center for Lesbian Information and Technology.
Right.
And you said, just as an academic yourself, like that scene to you was kind of cringy, but for a very different reason from the other scenes that were cringy.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not just an academic. I mean, I'm trained to be a historian, and she's in an archive, and the archivist's approach. And so this is the thing, is I'm trying to figure out if this is a commentary on how, I don't think, but maybe it's a commentary on how sort of the Black materials, there's a specifically Black lesbian collection within this sort of informal archive that's being run by a collective, and it has no resources. This has not been properly filed, right? Like this is not
right.
This is an archive full of boxes that has not been turned into a proper archive.
It's like if all the stacks in my room or your room, Isaac, were declared an archive, and we're like, well, I could find some stuff maybe for you, but it's in this pile over here. Like, it's not funded. It's a total volunteer passion project.
Well, right. But this is, I mean, part of it is this is another showing of how queer history and then queer Black history is treated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not something that gets into proper archives. Archives are state projects. The proper organization of archive is done by professional archivists, and that doesn't exist for material like this.
Right.
Or at least at that time.
Yeah, at least in 93, 95 when she's filming this.
But no, what's cringy, but it's played for laughs, is that the person like takes a box and dumps it on the table, and Cheryl is going, oh my God, like stops her from dumping out the next box. I mean, but it's like, these are all, documents from the 30s. Like, you can't treat them that way. I'm just sitting there going like, oh my God. Oh, don't. I know these aren't actual items from the 30s, but don't do that. It's not funny.
Right.
History is being lost in front of us. You can't treat them that way. But it's also, I mean, part of what's funny about it is this is the woman the woman who's working there, who's already just said how precious all these things are and how we only have a volunteer crew
Yeah.
and so forth, and then just
And then
treats everything
dumps
with
the box on the table. Well, then
dumps the box on the table.
and then the punchline though is that like when Cheryl asks a question about something else, the archivist, the woman goes and gets another box and is ready to just dump it as well. And Cheryl's like, no, I got it. Just like, and grabs the box from her to just carefully go through stuff rather than just add to the pile on the table already.
Well, there's there's some real laugh out loud jokes in this movie.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the other one is that so they work at this video store, and Tamara gets porn by like basically orders porn while working at the video store, porn videos, by putting under the name of an employee ordering. I mean of a customer,
the patron.
ordering
Yeah.
that, and then just taking the movies.
Well,
for
then she
herself.
also, as the gag, she uses Diana.
She uses Diana for this,
soon to be girlfriend of Cheryl to order.
right? And so it gets found out, and there's slapstick around that, and it works, right? It works really well. It is really funny.
My laugh out loud moment is just as a film geek was at one point when they're doing like the first meet cute scene between Cheryl and Diana. She's talking about like doing a double feature, and she's trying to get some recommendations from Cheryl, and then the recommendation was Repulsion and Cleopatra Jones ends up being the double feature she chooses to go with.
Oh, I was thinking, I don't know if that's a good double feature.
I don't know if it's good or not, but it cracked me up that I was like, I never would have put those two together, but sure, why not? Yeah, here, take these home tonight and let me know what you think.
There was.
Well, we mentioned a few times, and as we're wrapping up here, just the fact that this movie came out as part of the new queer cinema movement that came about in the 90s. B. Ruby Rich was a film critic at the time and is one who coined the phrase in like the early 90s. But there was this it'd also be called like the queer new wave because everything's got to be waves, which I'm fine with in the way film history goes. So there was a wave of films in the early 90s that came about because you have a thriving festival circuit at that time, because you've got like Sundance, and the explosion of independent film usually goes back to Sex, Lies, and Videotape because that became a huge financial success. But there was plenty of success through the film festival circuit before that. But Cheryl is definitely, and the Watermelon Woman enjoyed a healthy festival run and got a lot of accolades and everything else, but was firmly within that queer cinema movement in the 90s. And I found it interesting because she's one of the directors who's still around and still making great stuff. Her and one of the ones that I really latched onto coming out of the queer new wave was Gregor Araki and his films, Living End, Doom Generation, that sort of stuff. And it's interesting that there's a number of those directors that went on and are working exclusively, as of right now, in television.
Mm.
And Cheryl is one of those. I'm glad she is still finding work and she is out there making her voice and her perspective heard, even if it's not in the feature film area, which is where I tend to, stick around and do most of my watching. But she's even recently is working on the television Netflix adaptation of Dear White People, based on Justin Simon's film, which is hilarious and also a great satire as well. But everything from like Lovecraft Country, Why the Last Man, The Umbrella Academy, she's still a contemporary working filmmaker. Cheryl is. Right. So I hate to be rigid about it. I'm looking forward to a feature film again at some point, but whether or not she gets there, that's not up to me. But
well, I mean, that's the reality of film these days, right? Like,
honestly, it is. Yeah, it really is.
Is that a lot of the best filmmaking is on TV at this point, and also it's not that easy to make movies.
Holy shit! You're right. I was just double checking. She just did 2 episodes of the new season of Bridgerton. Like, just came out at the point of us recording like a week or so ago. So
really, Bridgerton?
Yeah, what a wide variety of interesting television work too. But yeah, we were kind of talking about it, Isaac, before we were recording. But that idea of when you're plugged into a I don't even know what network television means anymore. When you're plugged into a television series, though, like how much? And I haven't watched any of the episodes that she's directed here. How much of your own kind of like auteurist intentions come through when you're doing like episode 5 and 6 of season 3 of a long running series?
Well, maybe we should watch some of those episodes cold and figure out if we can
Oh,
if
that's
we
a
can
good idea.
feel her style.
Yeah, do you feel Cheryl coming through on, this one episode of Lovecraft Country when I haven't watched anything of that show? That's actually an interesting idea. That might be worth doing. But
Yeah.
anyway, so Watermelon Woman, yes, definitely must see. Go watch it immediately. It's been streaming on Canopy for ages. I assume it's still there at this point. If not, get to your local library or just purchase it. Own some physical media. Woman should be in your collection for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great film.
What do we got up next, Isaac?
Well, what are we doing next time? We're going to be sort of continuing on the vein that we've been on by watching Bill Gunn's black vampire horror masterpiece, Ganja and Hess from 1973. This is a movie that I've really wanted to revisit for a while, and it felt like, considering a lot of the sort of interconnections that if you look at the different movies that we've been doing over the last few months, a lot of the interconnections, it seemed like a logical place to go.
Well, I mean, he's in Losing Ground, and we talked about him quite a bit on that episode. So
Yeah, specifically,
I mean,
I didn't say it openly. Yes, specifically, check out the Losing Ground episode before listening to this episode, because it's all going to be interconnected.
Yeah, before we get to Ganja and Hess, so if you're listening to this one when it comes out, it is not available yet because we haven't recorded it yet. So go back and check out Losing Ground to get a really full appreciation on the Renaissance artist that is Bill Gunn. And I think that'll wrap up. I think that was the last of the ones we had on our list for kind of the black filmmaker auteurs we wanted to look at here, Isaac. So we'll be wrapping that up with Ganja and Hess. But before we sign off, we always like to do the quick reminder to you folks to be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. That helps with other folks discovering the show as well. But the most direct way to help other folks find the show is if you enjoy this episode or any previous episodes, tell a friend or two about it. We're also up and running on the usual social media stuff. Just check the show notes for the links, quick links for any of those accounts. And until next time, I am Aaron.
And I am Isaac. And stay safe out there. I mean, I think I've said this before. I always want to like catch the moment of like, what you should stay safe from. And there are a lot of things at this point. I mean, we basically given up on even trying to prevent COVID. I realize it's still at relatively low levels, but we do have a new variant, and we still have the potential for an annihilatory, nuclear war in regards to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia and the intertwining of the great nuclear powers and that. And, I mean, there's a lot of there isn't a point of saying stay safe from that, because there is no way to stay safe from that other than preventing such a thing from happening.
It's kind of the only option there.
Right. So, I'm just going to end on that grim a note.